Hello, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Please join our experienced and knowledgeable panel of hosts as we explore the great mysteries of our time: Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and unexplained phenomena.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our show. Tonight, Mike and I are joined by Kevin Ian Beagle. Kevin is a very effusive and knowledgeable expert on all sorts of mythology. He's a very humble guy. He's going to talk to us about a number of different mythological aspects all over the world, anything from ghosts to folklore. Kevin, welcome, and thank you very much for being on our show.
Oh, thanks very much. You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
No, it's our absolute pleasure. Just first of all, just so we can understand, obviously you're based in North America now, but you're from Northern Ireland. How did you end up in America?
Well, my mum is from Northern Ireland, and she met my father as an exchange student. It was a very strange thing. My uncle, for some reason, came to America in the 60s and spent a lot of time on Native American reservations and things like that. And so my mom came across as an exchange student, met my dad. My dad's an American. And so when they got married, they moved to America, and then my dad decided that he wanted to become a doctor. And so we moved to Northern Ireland before I was born. I was born there. My brother was born in America. And so I grew up in Northern Ireland in the 1970s, which is about the worst time you could grow up in Northern Ireland.
It was a difficult time,
but, yeah, so, I mean, it was very interesting for that. So I grew up there, had some very sort of strange experiences as a child. And so, like a lot of people who are into folklore, they're trying to solve a question. And one of the things that I was trying to solve was what exactly, happened to me when I was a child, because it just didn't seem sort of rational at all. And I've tried to explain it in any which way that's scientifically possible, but I can't. And so I've sort of gone around the world talking to different people and about different ideas, especially around fairies and aliens. And one of the things that I found out is that there's a universality of mythology when it comes to that kind of thing, and everybody's experiences are sort of the same. And so whenever I moved to America, I got older. I started to work for a government place that was dealing with veterans and things like that, because I was very interested in First World War stuff. So I dealt with a lot of veterans at the time, and I had come here to try to make my, go to the big smoke to make your money in America. And so I came here to do all that. But then I really started to miss the whole idea of, folk stories and things like that. And so I actually went back to school and got my master's degree in education. But my thesis was on Native American folklore and teaching Native Americans specifically on reservations. So I've spent a lot of time talking to lots of people around, lots of people in this part of America now, because of course the language roots are different for different things like that.
Let me pause you there, Kevin, if I may, because I want to come back to something you said earlier, which was very interesting. When you said you were trying to make sense of something that happened in your childhood, is that something you want to share with us? What were you specifically referring to?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, there's two events. One sort of is is more. I mean, to be honest with you, when you get past a certain amount, I'll just say it because I've got nothing really to lose.
Say it.
Yeah, well, I grew up in a village that had been there for probably 3,000 or 4,000 years. I always make the joke of that, and so a lot of, and to be honest with you, a lot of the people in the village were very related to each other, and there was a legend of a leprechaun that lived up in the woods, and we would go up. We lived. The village was right next to the Dufferin estate, Lady Dufferin, the Clandy estate, and so there was just a ton of parkland and raw woods up there, and we would go up there and look for certain things. Like there was a fairy orchid or a lily that I'm not sure which. I don't remember now. I'm not a flower person, but we would go up and look for it, and then we would go to see Lenny the Leprechaun, right? So Lenny the Leprechaun was something that my mom had seen, my Aunt Hannah had seen, and this is one of those things where it had people over years had documented what they'd seen. And so my mom would always take up this little acorn full of honey, an acorn cup full of honey, and we would put it in front of this tree. Well, one day there was rustling around the bushes, and something stuck its head out of the thing, and I thought it was just some sort of squirrel or a rabbit or something like that. There was hares and all kinds of things up there, so I didn't really pay much attention to it. But then out of the woods comes this bipedal 2 to 3 foot thing, and it started running around by this tree, and it was naked. It didn't have any clothes on, and it had a big head, big eyes, spindly arms, no genitalia that I could see. And so it started to move around, and so I saw it for just a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds, and so I thought, well, that's it. I've seen a leprechaun. So I said to my mom, "Yeah, look, I've seen it too now." And so now this was I was probably 5 years old at the time, so it was 1976. It was prior to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and why I say that is because of the fact that a lot of times people will say, "Oh, well, this is this archetypal idea of aliens that come from a certain experience or something you're seeing on TV," and so I had come.
I want to come on to that later. Let's focus on this thing, because this is interesting. So carry on with that if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I came home and I talked to my Aunt Hannah about it. And so I said to her, this is what I saw. And she brought out her little journal and said that, from when she was in the 50s, and she'd seen it. And she described it as a sort of a spindly arm porcelain doll. And I thought that was actually very, very good, very good description of it, because it didn't show any emotion. The face didn't move in that way, and so small slits. I don't know if it had any nostrils at all. Small slit for an eye, for a mouth, but big, big glassy, sort of black eyes. And so it was grayish green. I remember that, and so that was it. So everybody in the village just said, "Oh, you haven't seen the leprechaun." So I mean, and I come from a village where that wasn't a weird thing. Everybody in the village knew each other. Everybody knew the stories, and so it was never the only person who poo-pooed it and said, "Don't say anything about that," was my father. And I think that, that was just, the Americanism of trying to say, "Oh, I don't want them locked up." But then another thing happened that was within 6 months of this, and I started to experience loss of time, and so I would go up the hill and go to these different places, and I remember several times coming home, and the whole village is out looking for me, because Northern Ireland's so far north that in the winter time, the summertime, it doesn't get dark until 11:30, 12 o'clock sometimes.
Yeah.
Just depends on the time of the day. So so I came home one time, and I thought I was coming home, a couple of hours after I'd left, or a few things, and it was basically 7 or 8 hours later. And so everybody was out looking for me, and so it was just, I got this sort of thing, that the tag of that I was being taken by the fairies. Well, that was all fine and good, and everybody pooled up and got together, bought me a watch so I could tell time and everything like that, and so, but that didn't seem to solve the issue of these lost time that I used to experience. And so, but then one time, I started to, I was walking behind my mom and my brother, because this was a small village, and so there was a shop and a post office and a pub. That was it. The three necessities in life. And so, and we actually lived behind the pub, and so it wasn't very far away from my grandfather's shop until where the pub was. And so there was an alleyway that was there between the two things, and they were old houses. They were probably built, I think, in the early 1700s, both of these things. And so I was going through a pretty narrow alleyway, from being in England, that a lot of buildings are pretty narrow, especially at that point in time. So I was going through these two things, and this sort of gentle wind came. Not a wind like a gale or anything like that, but just a gentle wind, what we used to call a fairy wind. And and now whenever that happens, you're supposed to lay down flat on the ground if a fairy wind comes, so it'll pass right over you. And so my mom and my brother stepped into the side door of the entryway to this pub, and I was hit by this wind. Like I said, it was just a breeze, really, more than anything. But I shot straight up into the air, and I started to levitate. Now, my brother and my mom were standing there looking at me, and my mom has passed away now, but before she passed, I had her in front of the whole family say, and my brother, did this happen? Because, I don't want to go on the radio and say, and tell the story about me levitating if this didn't really happen. And so I remember it where I levitated at the 2 stories of the house. Like it was a 2-story building, and I went to the top of that. My mom started to scream at me, say you don't want to go, which I then did do. And so after that, I started to move actually towards the forest in a very controlled way. And after I said I didn't want to go, it let me back down onto the ground and gently left me on the side of this roadway. And then that was it. So it was very strange in the fact that I didn't feel like I had a hand underneath me, or that I was being lifted up by something, or I was being pulled up by anything. I was just basically free-floating and weightless at this point in time. And so now, whenever I told that to my father, even though my mom and my brother confirmed that it had happened, my brother's older than me, he did not want me to talk about that at all, because it was so basically crazy sounding. and
can we just pause yeah. I just want to try and I want to try and make some connection because there's a couple of questions out of those two events. So if I may, were you around the same age when these two incidents happened? The first one with the creature and the second one with the levitation. Or were you older in the second incident?
No, it was within a year of the two things happening. All this sort of phenomenon that was happening was within a year.
Okay. So when we look at that, let's go back to the creature because I want to try because it ties in with something that I'm going to ask you later on, but it's actually useful to get the information. I think. So with the creature, did it actually speak to you or communicate with you? You said it didn't. It had a sort of passive face. Did it know you were there, or was it operating in its own particular manner?
Well, it seemed to be really sort of, like I said, I was not spoken to telepathically or anything like that. It seemed to me that it was caught sort of unaware of what I was doing, and it was trying to hide. And so that was the thing that I had gotten out of it. It was sort of like if I had to dictate it or sort of look back at it and say this is what happened, I would imagine that what was happening was it was kind of like an oh crap moment, like this is happening. And so it seemed to me like it was unaware of the fact that I was there as much as I was unaware of the fact that it was there, and which is interesting because I don't know how far you want to go into this, but I was almost thinking like in a way. It was almost like a dimensional sort of shift. You see, like almost to the point where it was almost to the point where we were sharing the same spot, and that all of a sudden it just came together at that point. Although I didn't see anything like, flashing lights or anything like that or what have you. It was just more of a materialization, dematerialization type scenario. But
when you saw that creature, was that, were you the only person to see it amongst your group, or did other people see it? And is it consistent with the recordings? Is it the same thing as your mother saw or other people in the village saw, or was it something unique that just you had seen as a physical entity? I know people have said they've seen leprechauns or something. Was it what you'd seen specifically?
Yeah, well, I looked that time there. I was the only one who had seen it during that experience. However, it was very sort of interesting to me because of the fact that it jived with other people's experience. Now, does that mean that for some reason I couldn't have sort of filled in the memory after? Yeah, that's true. But I think what was interesting about it was my Aunt Hannah was an interesting person in the fact that she was from a long line of Druids, and I was too, and things like that. She actually asked me what I had seen before she showed me. So it wasn't a situation where that was just like, well, did you see this? Because this is what I would see. And nobody had ever told me what a leprechaun looked before. I thought that a leprechaun was going to be a little green man. A human man with a green. It turned out that really it was not a man wearing green. It was a little green man. That was the difference between the two things. And so,
I think that's interesting. Now, Now, when she said that she showed you those things and she's a druid, and they correlated with your experience, did she tell you what it was? Did you ever find out, what she actually thought it was, bearing in mind that she was a druid?
Well, she again, we had gone up there basically calling it a leprechaun, and so that was the thing that was odd about it, is that it was an active participation thing. Obviously it wasn't just they had been going to this tree for years and years and years and laying this gift down, and so at that point in time we understood. It was after that I started to see that I saw that they started to teach me about different fae and sort of earth spirits and that type of thing like that. Whereas before that, it was very Presbyterian the way that I was raised, and so it was sort of very interesting to see this two sides of this family history that they'd sort of hidden away for a long time. In other words, they sort of had the public face and the private face, and then I started to learn about things like animism and rocks having spirits and trees having spirits and different things like that.
Okay, so this is interesting stuff. So when you go to when you have this this levitation experience, was it connected in your mind with the previous experience of seeing the creature, or was it completely separate events, Kevin? What do you say?
Well, the only thing that I can say about that is that I was raised up into the air, and I started to move towards the forest, and the loss of time idea. It happened in the middle of the daytime. I looked up, there was nothing above me, there wasn't any sort of thing that was like a tractor beam pulling me in or anything like that. So, but it was just this levitation event, and then my mom had told me to say no 3 times. Obviously with Druidry, there's several things that are always sort of interesting. 3 being a magic number, and 7 and 13, and so he said no 3 times, and then it basically had to go away with you. Had to leave you alone at that point in time. You've made your intention.
If you said no 3 times, and it's specifically no 3 times, then it had to leave you.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so, that's a very big thing. Now, that comes through in a lot of different things. Even in some different English law or things like that. Whenever they used to just say you're going to be hung by the neck until you're dead.
3 times.
Dead. Yeah. So this is something that was very interesting to me from that standpoint. That the number 3 really is a sign of intent. Now that goes along with sort of the Celtic, sort of Irish triple-headed goddess, and I think, and we can talk about St. Patrick, but I think if you were going to say that there was a group of people who would buy into the Trinity, you couldn't come across probably a better group of people than Irish people, because if you're talking about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit versus the triple-headed God, which was past, present, future, well, it almost matches up. I'm not a theologian. I have taken theology classes and things like that, but I will say that to me, as a layman, trying to look at it like the Son, the Father, and the Holy Ghost is to me, past, present, future in some other way, since they are sort of combined together as one thing. So, you
yeah,
know.
no. I think what you are correct in saying that 3 is a resonant number, not just in relation to the theological things, but often, you hear about activities at night, strange things happening. Often, many witnesses I speak to, I say, well, what time was it? Oh, it was 3 in the morning. Yeah, there's a lot of patterns about 3, and I can see that. Now, linking your own personal experiences, obviously you talked how you went and studied the Native American legends. Did you come up with any conclusions as to what the good folk, the fae, the fairies, the leprechauns, these sort of creatures, what do you think they are, Kevin?
Well, again, I think, from my standpoint, which is, looking at it from 2 different things. Clearly, there is a spirit, energy, whatever you want to call it, that is around things. Now, if you want to define that as magnetism, if you want to define that as actual beings that live in there or things that speak to you, it does seem to me like there are, especially around, what people call vortexes or stone circles or things like that there are these places that people have gone to for time immemorial for this type of experience. And, a lot of that has to do with maybe magnetism, resonance of stone, for example. And what it does is interesting, because you can make the argument that it's all completely delusional. I accept that. But what I have experienced over the time is there are certain places that make, for whatever reason, that seem to make you experience this thing. And now I've been to Malta, and I've been to the beehive chambers in Malta, and which nobody really knows when they were built and things like that. And it seems to me like there's always this resonant frequency, because I think it really has to do with frequency at some point. And it's 110 to 112 hertz that just seems to come out of these different chambers, and it comes down and focuses on your mind. And what 110 hertz is supposed to do is to cut down your frontal lobe, and to which is where your speech therapy is, and sort of give you this sort of ability to see. So is it overloading your pineal gland and excreting DMT so that you believe that this is what's happening? I don't know, but what's interesting about it is that there are these different phenomenons that you can't explain away, as well. It's interesting whenever you talk to debunkers, and they'll say, "Well, it's this," and then, but it doesn't. They don't seem to talk about the physical evidence that seems to be there. Now,
okay. Can I just pause you 1 second, if I may?
Yeah.
Because I want to try to explore a little bit around that. So when we talk about physical resonance, because the question I have for you is, if these creatures are physical, then and they're manifest, and sometimes it's accidental, and sometimes it's deliberate. Let's just say, okay, I understand the arguments from debunkers and it's easy for me to put to you, well, it's just a childhood illusion, or it's a delusion brought on by your community. You know all the arguments, so I'm not going to explore those, because I know you'll have considered them. Obviously, you've studied this as part of your masters. But what I'm interested in is, if these creatures have been around for centuries, let's say that some of them in some way are real, however we want to dress it up. What do they want? What do they want, Kevin?
Well, I think there's a if you look back to sort of the origin stories of a lot of different myths, and I'll sort of condense them down because you can't really talk too much about everything. It basically comes down to in a lot of different belief systems that the Earth at one point in time was less dense than it is now. In other words, as time goes on, we are becoming more and more dense of a density, whereas and this is the argument a lot of people make around, this is why children can see the other world or the spirit world or whatever you want to call it. Either you want to call it walking in two worlds or being between two worlds. That, we were at one point in time connected much more to the universal unconsciousness, the collective unconsciousness. And so therefore, and it has to do with the idea of the suturing in your brain, closing that off. And so as when children are born, obviously there's large sutures and there's spaces in their brain. And so you could say that they're still connecting to the collective unconscious. And so you've got this spirit world and you've got this physical world, and which live basically side by side the whole time. But as we get older, that shuts off. And so, because if it didn't shut off and we were part of the collective unconsciousness, then we wouldn't have any free will. We have to be disconnected from that because otherwise we would have the hive mind. And so part of the issue that we have is it's a curse and a blessing. That's one thing that I find about mythology is it's always one or the other. There's two ways of looking at it, and that's it. That we don't have the hive mind because we can think for ourselves and we're not truly connected to this other dimension that sort of shifts over into our place. So. Well,
let me put it another way. In some ways, forgive me for interrupting. I want to try and nail this down a little bit because this question I'm super interested in. Now I've heard a lot of people talk about, well, maybe these fairies are the grey aliens. You know what I mean? And it's just something that has been around for centuries. And in medieval times, people could classify them as leprechauns. They believed in this Neoplatonic world, or they believed in fairies. These days, we have these grey aliens, and their technology has improved because it's part of our consciousness. What do you think about that? Is that a reasonable assumption? Is that something you believe, or are they completely separate things?
I don't think they are completely separate. I think that part of the issue that we have is that we think that aliens are from the outer universe. In other words, from another planet, and that may be, but I'm not going to say. But my opinion is that these beings have been around for forever and a day. There's old Irish fairy tales about, cauldrons being flown around with these two little beings in them, and they get out and they abduct people and they take them away and then they come back. And so this is an idea that's interesting to me because I don't think it was that long ago where people didn't think that was a possibility of an inner world. I mean, Admiral Byrd was talking about how he flew to the poles and the hollow Earth idea, and Nazis in the Second World War were exploring hollow Earth, and so this is an idea that for whatever reason, sort of intraterrestrial beings seem to be what most people call these different types of things, because obviously the other world is usually under the ground, under the water, and so they're very, very close and yet so far away because we can't seem to get to those different areas. But that wouldn't mean that they wouldn't come out of the ground and talk about that. There was an interesting case in 1200s in England where there was the Green Children of Whithorn.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is that alien people now have totally taken the story and changed it into these people are from these things are from outer space and everything like that. Now they just sort of showed up on the ground. There's a boy and a girl. They were green. They wouldn't eat anything that was meat or anything like that. And so basically, as time goes on, they develop into language. The boy dies very, very soon. The girl lives for a lot longer, but she claims that she's from a place called Saint Martin's Land.
Yeah.
And so that's where everybody lives under the ground, and it's all a happy place which is very much the way that Irish people describe Tir na nog or something like that, the land of the sleep, the land of sleep, and those different types of things. And so I think that part of the reason that changed around the start of the century was because of the fact that World War I was an epochal moment for many Britons, and a lot of people in Europe too, because of the way it was. And a lot of people actually started moving towards the spiritual realm. But then you also have the Cottingley cousins in England are taking pictures of fairies, and then that becomes sort of this controversy about whether those were real or not, and then a lot of people say it's not real. So fairies at a very big time. I mean, imagine, for example, if it turned out, and I'm not saying this is true, but if it turned out that the Patterson-Gimlin film was a fake. Now, if it turned out that had happened, you almost wouldn't be able to talk about Bigfoot anymore. You know what I mean? Even though I believe as some kind of a phenomenon that it does exist. But I think that's what happened in this case too, where you started to move from them being intraterrestrial to extraterrestrial, and some of that has to do with the sightings around those times where there were flying ships that were being seen around then, and we move into the airplane era. And so we start to look up, I think.
Well, let me pause you there because you've come up with a couple of things, and I want to focus on this one specific question. So, as you know, with the Cottingley fairies, those were proved to be paper cutouts that were photographed. And so they were effectively debunked. And I know you know that, but just so everybody else can understand that in case they subsequently look it up. But what I think you're saying is, okay, there was this movement and this acceptance, but when things become debunked in the same way as they would be if the Patterson-Gimlin film was, then it loses credibility. But the question I have about these creatures, I guess, and I really want your opinion on this one specific point, is they're around. If we say they're around, and they have been for centuries, and they interact with humanity, do they specifically want? Do they want contact? Do they want to use us for something? I mean, you were levitated up. What do these creatures, in your opinion, want?
Well, in my opinion, I take the Irish approach, which is that they are neutral towards us if we leave them alone. Like I said, a lot of people think, fairies they have the Disneyfication of the fairy ideal, which is that fairies are here. It's a fairy godmother. They're here. They're going to obey our command. They're in the same way a genie is supposed to obey its master. But these are beings that want respect. In other words, can you make a Faustian bargain with a fairy? I believe you could. But the best thing that I would imagine that would be is if you expect them to do something for you, then you have to reciprocate.
They'll want something.
In other words, they're. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that they'll want something in return. And the point I was going to make, just for everybody else, is you made the point about genies. Now, in Islam, there's the genies the jinn are a real spiritual creature. So they believe that I know you know this again. So because I want people to understand the wider implications of what you're saying, they believe that they're a real spiritual creature. They're not humans. They're not angels or demons or whatever else. They're another creature which exists separately, who are, broadly speaking, neutral towards us, but will interact with us. But there's a bargain, and that's what all of the Islamic world believes in a real nutshell. So the notion that there are these spiritual creatures that exist out of what we know as tangibles is accepted by millions of people across the world. We tend to scoff at the idea of a fairy and say, "Oh, that must be nonsense," but that's not the case for Islam and jinn. And do you see parallels between the jinn as opposed to the fae or the fairies? Is that something that you're suggesting, or am I wrong? Tell me if I am.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. I think that it was a common belief up until the 1900s. I mean, it was used, the idea of a changeling coming and taking a child and replacing it with a sickly child, or taking your wife, for example. The case in Ireland, that came up from that was that they had stolen this guy's wife, and he basically ended up, with the help of his friends, sort of murdering his wife because the case came up as he ended up being found guilty of manslaughter, not intentional murder, because he honestly believed that he was not killing his wife. He was killing somebody who looked like his wife, and after he burned her. It's a horrific story, but he burned her because that was the way to get the fairy out. Apparently, that he went out to this fairy hill and was waiting for her to appear out of this hill. And so, that's turn of the century stuff. Like I said, so again, Irish people think they're neutral. They can come and steal you and take you away and bring you back. So it's an interesting idea, for example, that hybridization was a possibility even back then. You weren't talking about genetic manipulation, but basically stealing your wife and impregnating her. She's going to have a half fairy baby, and so that's this is coming from that standpoint. So. But Irish people still refer to them as the good people, or the little gentleman or whatever, because of the fact that it wasn't because they were nice. It was because they didn't like it whenever somebody, quote unquote, dissed them, Whereas in Scotland and Wales, there's a lot more of a very hostile relationship between people and fairies. And that's always an interesting thing, because in Scotland, they treated fairies, any time that they would have a fairy story, there was very, very hostile towards them. And so that was one of those things where it was an ongoing type of a battle. In Wales, not so much, but that was just one of those things that came through there, that people don't seem to realize. But then again, as time went on and we started talking about witches and things like that, and King James I's aversion for witches, I mean, he wrote a book that was basically on how to catch witches, and actually, interviewed. It'd be the only monarch that I know of that actually interviewed a witch named Agnes. Yeah, Agnes Sampson.
Yeah.
Because he was very, very afraid of that. So you can see that a lot of people who were sort of natural people that believed in, sort of, herbology and those types of things, natural healers and things like that, got caught up in this whole idea later, and were very, very. I mean, there was 400 witches that were killed in Edinburgh alone. So I mean, it's a very scary story that.
I do. I mean, I did a paper on witchcraft at university as part of my degree. So, no, absolutely, everything you're saying is correct. I mean, I'm interested. I just want to tie in this whole point, because I think this is kind of a unique point. So, you mentioned about the stories. I love this point about, if you could expand on it, about the idea of fairies at the time abducting people from their cauldrons. How do you think that links in directly with the notion of alien abduction with spacecraft? I mean, is it really just some very cunning entities in disguise transmorphing themselves to adapt to our culture?
Well, if you think about it from that standpoint, about old stories, Celtic stories or whatever, obviously I've done a lot of research on different things. Celts were known for having these huge cauldrons that you could fill up with wine or different meads and things like that. And so that was part of the whole tradition. You could fit 3 people inside one of these cauldrons, these very huge bronze things. So if you think about a huge cauldron with 2 or 3 little people in it, and they come out and they hop out. I mean, to be honest with you, it's a round object that something's getting out of, coming and taking you away for it. You have no way of hiding from it, because of the fact that they seem to be able to put you into this sleep that you have no control over. It's very, very similar in that way. In the fact that I think you can make the argument that they're seeing exactly the same thing, but they explain it in a different way. I mean, that's the only large metal thing that they would have seen back then that they could have put into the same type of scenario. Shiny metal, large things. Now, and then you also get into the idea of fairy lights or orbs. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, no, he's going to talk about orbs. But the thing that I would say is, and I talked to Nick Pope about this, who was in charge of the MOD's UFO desk, at Whitehall. And if you look at the Condign report, they admit that orbs are the one thing that they can't explain what it is. And I'm talking about self-luminescent plasma balls and orbs like that. So I'm not talking about stuff coming off. And so, is that there's the idea of sort of idealism that's either a thought being or something like that's coming from these creatures. In other words, I've seen orbs in the woods. I'm not going to say that I haven't. I have. The difference being is that at what point in time, at what altitude do they become UFOs or UAPs or whatever you want to do it, and not something else? Now, we know people who interpret that as being something completely different, but what I'm saying is that if you go talk to different people around, like at Crater Lake, the native people who live around Crater Lake talk about orbs all the time. That's a phenomenon that they see all the time. And then whenever you ask them what it is, they'll say it's an orb. They don't. It doesn't necessarily have to be something else, but it's just something they see all the time. And is that a creation of magnetism or magma, or the fact that all those different locations around there, there's gold claims all around there? and so therefore it's very full of quartz and very full of limestone and these different things that create this phenomena that we interpret as something else. That's my point. I mean, you know what I'm saying is I don't have an answer, unfortunately, other than my opinion. However, I always look at it like this, Adam. You've been to Africa, and you look at it from a standpoint of, you know, if there's in the savannah, if there's a watering hole, things go to that hole, that watering hole, you know. But a lion is not related to an elephant or is not related to a hippopotamus or whatever. You know, it's a question of, are these different phenomena going to the same place to feed off this sort of energy? And in my cases, if we're talking about ghosts and things like that are interacting with people, no, you know, my idea of what a ghost is just your ancestors trying to come through the veil, and you know, and because I believe that they can transfer back and forth throughout that type of thing. And so different times of the years you've got sort of the thinning of the veil, but at certain times of the day you're going to have that as well. And so, you know, I've done a lot of work around megalithic structures as well. And so 3 o'clock in the morning is an interesting time too, because that's usually before dawn. And what I was told as a druid growing up was the stones release the energy before the dawn. You see, there's that time before the dawn that these things have saved up all this energy, and then all of a sudden that they release it all at once. And so a lot of times whenever you're looking at these, you know, shows with people that are dancing around at midnight around a stone circle, completely not, you know, the idea of what I've been told. And I don't want to offend anybody if that's the way you believe, because it's not my thing. I'm not saying that you're not right. But,
I understand. I just have this question for you, though, if I may, because it leads on to what you've been talking about, and it's an important one. So you've had a number of different experiences. You've studied mythology. You are connected with druids in some way. Do you, or are you, sensitive to these things because you see things or have had experiences? Some people will say you're delusional, but I don't want to go on to that because I'm interested. I'm interested in what you think. So, are you unusually sensitive? Is there something about you, a gift that you have that other people may not have, or only certain people have? And if so, what is it?
Well, I don't think. If it is something that's about me that's different from what other people have, I'm unaware of it. I think that a lot of times this comes down to a hypervigilance of my childhood. In other words, at a very young age, I was taught to look out for things. You know, you have to be very aware of a bag that's out of place, or somebody leaves something on a bus or something like that, because it could be a bomb or whatever. You don't make that mistake. So you do seem to catch up on just strange things that happen. And I think that a lot of times people are very sort of focused on trying to see a certain thing. And I've gone out in the woods with certain people for Bigfoot, and I say, look at that over there. You know, that looks like that's something, and let's go look at it or whatever. And they'll say, oh, I never even saw that or whatever. Some people have such a big tunnel vision that they're not sort of accepting all the thing that goes around it. And now I have had really strange stuff that goes along with that, and I accept that from a standpoint of that. You know, you can't. There's two worlds that you're believing in here. You're dealing with a rational system, which you can make an argument for. You know, you can say this is a rational thing I'm saying. This proves that this is right or wrong. You can dispute that with me, but there's the other side, the magical world, which is almost like, a faith-based thing. You can't argue with me about that, But I'm saying,
no.
Do I have an explanation? We could, But what I'm saying is that it's immaterial in some ways whether it happened or not, because again, as I said before, and I've done research on DMT and people who take DMT and things like that. People who take DMT store that in their memory. They don't think they're lying. As you know, and I know, if you ask somebody a question and then you go back and you say, okay, tell me that in reverse order or whatever, or just step. People can't lie like that. They lie in linear form. Yep. And with DMT,
I've used that tactic in court. Yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, yeah. But what I'm saying is that if you scan somebody who takes DMT and then you do an MRI of their head and they repeat it back to you, that is now their reality. That is their memory. It's not stored in the lying center of their brain. And so, no, that doesn't mean that I don't think people don't lie in paranormal, because I think that they do. Yeah. But what I'm saying is that from my standpoint, I try not. I've never charged to speak at a conference. I've never charged to be a guest anywhere. I've never done that because, again, that's just one of the. I've never written a book because, to be honest with you, I don't have the answers, and people who sort of pretend to have the answers or think that they have the answers are not being a humble student. I mean, like you, I've gone all over the world trying to solve these things, and I've always learned something new for somebody else. But anybody who's ever told me I have the answer, I don't get along with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're innately
sooner or later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say one thing, Kevin. I think you can still. It's not for me to tell you what to do, but you can still be humble and share your knowledge and your experience, because you're remarkably well versed on a lot of this folklore that goes across the world, and you can speculate and do that and still be humble, because I think you writing a book is probably a good idea, Kevin. I think people would certainly buy it. I think people would. I know it's not about money for you, but I think that people would want to buy it, because I think they'd be interested in what you had to say. You have some unique experiences, and you're very well researched on a number of things. And I sort of feel tonight I've started on one topic, and I have many other topics, and we've only really begun our conversation, and we've absolutely run out of time. On behalf of Mike and I hope we can have you back as a guest another time, because there's many other subjects I wanted to discuss with you. Would that be all right by you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I knew we were going to just scratch the surface. I hope I scratched the right part. And,
absolutely.
And so, I mean, from that standpoint, I just want people to just have an open mind about people who are doing it. Whether you look at me and you say, I feel sorry for that guy, he's got so much potential, his dad's a doctor, he has a master's degree, and he pissed it all away saying that he saw a fairy. I get it. You see, I followed, the last thing I'd say is, I followed a scientific discipline, and I think it's important. But, often scientific discoveries are there because of, those assumptions are challenged, and in providing it's the right methodology, then we can do that and move forward. But that's a debate for a whole different time. Somebody just wants to say a very quick hello to you.
Hi, Kevin. I really enjoyed the show. I hope we can hang out again with you and your wife someday in person.
Okay, that'd be great, love. I'm calling Adam's wife Love, but I meant that in the Irish way, the Coronation Street way.
Well, everyone in Northern England and Northern Ireland call people Love. It's very common. It's just what we do. Yeah. People Love. All right. Well, Kevin,
right.
we've kind of run out of time, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. It's been a wonderful experience. And those are questions I really wanted to ask you. And, there's many more I want to ask you. So hopefully you'll do us the very kind favour and come back soon.
No problem. All the best, everyone.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Kevin Ian Beagle giving a unique take on the folklore of his native country, and also as well giving some very unique background onto what these creatures were, and being brave enough, I think, to share some dramatic personal experiences, which is always difficult for people, particularly on a subject like this. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. I'm Adam Davies, and the producer is Mike Richburg. I thank you, and good night.